being that instructional leader, not closing themselves off in the door in their own office and shutting the door and letting everything else go wild. They really took leadership instructionally. Some of it was teacher education and the quality of professional development that came into the schools. But what was interesting to me is that there was a variety of other things. So some schools used Success for All and some of those kind of more package programs, other schools didn't. Some schools got rid of all the teachers and fired them. Some of these schools didn't. They used the teachers that were in the building. And so to me it said, and the Hope for Education, Urban Education, one of their recommendations at the bottom was to say, you know what, there's not a one-size-fits-all model. That there are some commonalities amongst these non-high-performing, high-poverty urban schools, but there's no one-size-fits-all or a magic bullet that's going to do it for everyone. And so for me as a researcher, again, that's a blessing and it's a curse. I mean, it's a blessing because you want to know the local context and you want to be able to work with teachers and not come in and feel like you're the expert coming in from all high. You want to work with teachers and try to grow it that way. But it's a curse because then what do you do? How do you get other districts or other schools to move into high performance? How do you get them to do that? So that for me was really interesting. And so then just to kind of quickly look at some hot topics, hip hop in the English classroom. I know Regina has talked a lot about that in her dissertation with Ernest Morel and his work, multicultural literature. A lot of these, if you see, there's a theme about materials, that reaching kids through materials matters and getting them to respond and to do the kind of rich dialogic discussions that Regina was talking about. Al Tatum's work on adolescent African American males, that's really important. Student culture, Gloria Ladson-Billings' work, just giving a sense, because we all know that urban kids aren't the same, and I don't want to paint a picture that they are all the same, or all into hip hop, or all into what have you. They're not the same, and so one of the best things about Gloria's work is that it's the inquiry that teachers do that makes the difference. You have to get to know kids individually, and part of that is their culture. So you want to, you want to reinforce that and validate their culture, but you don't want to make any assumptions. And I think that for me, that was part of a conclusion I came in my work. Just to kind of go through what I've been interested in, and again, it's in your handout. I've been interested in this idea of hybridity and how you bring two things together as a teacher. How you bring together something that seems so far away from what you would do, which might be your curriculum, for example. It might be so far away from how you and your gut feel about teaching. And your idea is way over here. How do you create a hybrid type of practice that brings the two together in a way that has some integrity? It makes you feel good. It actually is effective with the kids. It's about being creative.
Do you mean teaching method when you use the word category? Or style? Or what do you mean by the word category?
Yeah,
what kind of category do you think?
Well, this Soja quote up here, that's a good question. Hybridity actually comes from sort of like the post-colonial theory, and so categories here really refer to two opposing cultures. So it's almost this oppressor idea. Mainstream, non-mainstream, those are the cultural categories that they would be talking about, and that's what Soja wrote quite a bit about. So I just adapted it a little bit to think of categories that fit more instructionally. So phonics, whole language, home or school literacy. These are also very much binaries, and people feel like they can't be mixed. You can't have some lessons that are curricular driven and have something student driven at the same time. And I think that you can through a hybrid perspective. So that's kind of, yeah, you're right. That category there is sort of a funny word, but it's actually coming from a bit of a different place than the way I've used it. But if you're interested, especially in this whole idea of hybridity, I think her name is Amy Barton, but this Barton piece down there is an ARJ, and it's just a fantastic piece about hybridity. And lots of people think students bring in the hybridity, and they do. Students can do this kind of code switching and back and forth. It's teachers that can't do that so well. So, some of this work down here, like Moji's work, for example, is really about the student. Kirsten's piece is excellent because it's about how the teacher brings this stuff together. And so that's what I've been taking on, not so much the student perspective, but how do we get teachers to be able to do this kind of hybrid work. So just quickly, I've done some qualitative case study work with a colleague of mine, Heidi Ogilvie. We looked at teachers in challenging elementary schools. Her school, where she focused, was in DC. My school was in Fairfax, again, in one of those pockets of poverty, they like to call it, that had these challenges. And an achievement gap out, just out of control. And so we looked at what was going on in terms of the teachers. And one of the things we saw, again, was this idea of variety of materials. And you're using them purposefully. You're not just throwing them in the classroom library and hoping the kids read them. Our teachers had a purpose. They were able to teach the classics down there. You can't get away from teaching the classics. You cannot get away with teaching hip-hop all the time, or teaching SpongeBob all the time, or whatever kids are interested in. You can't do it. You've got to make, I love Regina's idea of the bridge. You've got to be able to bridge some of that, but you also want to be able to bring in the Beatles. And Nell Duke talked a little bit about this whole idea of nonfiction, actually quite a lot, and the fact that access for urban kids, very low for nonfiction, very, very low. And so, again, you want to bring in that nonfiction. You want to bring in the multicultural literature. Salt in the Shoes is one of my kids' favorite books. They see themselves, they often tell me, that kid is brown like me. And my child is one of 2 African-American students in his class. So it makes a difference for him to see that type of book in a classroom library. That doesn't mean necessarily you can teach a lesson, right, or that's all that will be there, or that every black kid will like that book. It's not to say that, but there's a, you're saying a sense of balance there. There's a sense that I can see myself in something I'm reading at some point of the day. I want to be able to see myself and feel comfortable. The same idea, I worked with a teacher in Fairfax in 6th grade. Not every day did she let the kids read whenever they wanted, but on Friday they were allowed to bring Vibe in. They were allowed to bring some of the magazines in. And as long as she kind of looked over and saw that the concept was okay, she let them read what they wanted to read, because isn't that the point of independent reading, to get the kids to read? So you might not be able to do it every day, but you can creatively create that hybrid. And that for me has been some of the work I've done on orchestration, and I use that idea so purposefully because it's not just implementing. You just can't take a curriculum and then just start saying, okay, objective 1, essential understanding. You can't do that. You got to breathe some life into it. And so orchestration to me means thinking on multiple levels, organizing in many different ways, so that you're touching the text that you have to touch, but you're also giving them exposure and access to other texts. That you're helping them do in authentic ways that they love, ways that help them to think about their own goals and purposes, but also ways that meet the curriculum standards. So there's this, it's this really, I don't know, and it's tough. It's tough. I can't even convey that to the teachers in my methods courses sometimes, how tough it is to bring those 2 things together. But for me, it's about building that disposition, believing that the curriculum is scripted, maybe, but they don't have to just do that. They can do more. There are places in the day that they can do what they would like to do. So part of it is that. And then I don't even want to go too far into recommendations. I would rather just have some conversation. But for me, the first one is the most important, that research needs to be disseminated to teachers in relevant and meaningful ways to them, what's going to help their kids on Monday morning. That to me, and it might be professional development, it might be through teacher education programs, but that dissemination to me is important. And I guess the bottom one is the same. I think if urban teachers in schools need to be if they're partners in research projects, then that kind of meaningful, usable knowledge will come forth. It's hard to do it if I'm just the researcher going in and never talk to the teacher, never talk to the students, never find out what that teacher is actually doing and why. So I think if urban researchers really could get in there and work with teachers in schools as partners, that would be just tremendous in terms of getting the kind of reading research we need. Thanks.
We'll now have a few minutes for questions and answers. Just as both of the presenters have talked about, we want to have this interconnection between research and practice, and I'm really excited that there's a lot of teachers and specialists and people from the school district here. So what I'm hoping is that you'll ask them questions that are burning questions from the presentations, but also questions that if you had to tell the researchers, if you have an opportunity right here at the university to tell them, this is something you really need